Why is there a Fey Wanderer when there's a Horizon Walker already published? That's the question I'm going to be answering today in this review of the Fey Wanderer, which is from the part 3 of the subclasses for the Unearthed Arcana that's hopefully going to be released in Xanathar's 2 Electric Boogaloo. Welcome to Intelligence 14 Wisdom 2, and this review is going to consist of two parts. The first is the thematic, where I talk about like the in-game justification for why you would have this feature, and I guess how it fits in with the core theme of the Fey Wanderer. I'll also be talking a little bit about the difference between the Fey Wanderer and the Horizon Walker. And then in the second part is the mechanical review, where I'll talk about the balance and the power of the different abilities and the usefulness of those. And so let's just talk about the general themes of the Fey Wanderer. So the Fey Wanderer is a bunch of different things that you can do, and that's one of the things I really like about this. You can think of several different options or varieties of this. You could be somebody who's trying to keep the separation of the material plane and the Feywild. You're trying to keep them separate, keep them from interacting with each other, because that leads to dangerous results. You might be a sort of a balance, trying to figure out how do we make it good for Fey to live in the material plane and material planers to live in the Feywild. Or you could be like a guide, say, trying to find and rescue people who've gotten lost in both places. You could be somebody hunting down criminals with experience from criminals from both sides, and that would be a unique bounty hunter. So there's lots of ideas around this Fey Wanderer, and it's a lot more than just I fight the Fey. You might be allied with the Fey, and one of the ways that the Fey Wanderer shows this is through their Feywild gifts. These are little gifts and blessings, little minor quirks of Fey magic around them. Perhaps it's from a benevolent Fey who appreciated your help in this daunting task, or maybe it's a sign of, Fey nobility, or perhaps you're just, as you're studying Fey magic and taking what you need from it, give yourself a little quirk to just, flavor yourself, because you've become like the Fey in more ways than you might think. And you can already see the difference between this and the Horizon Walker. The Horizon Walker is just, I fight everybody who doesn't live here, whereas the Fey Wanderer is more like a balance between those, or a separation, or a coexistence. Even though it's so specific, it's also so broad in what it can be, what kind of character would become a Fey Wanderer. So moving on to the Fey Wanderer magic, these include things, fairly obvious Fey things like Charm Person and Misty Step. One thing I would say is the 5th level spell that you get at 17th level, I believe, Mislead, which is you create an illusion of yourself while turning invisible, which is very fun and Fey-like. I think also Dream is a good option, and it's very Fey-like, and you're creating a dream, and you're giving a message to them while you dream, or you're just spooking them. So regardless, I think both of those are viable options for the 5th level spell that the Ranger gets, and I honestly wish they could get both. Now, the Cunning Will is the Fey's sort of diplomatic negotiations feature. They can they're more resistant to the Fey's attacks against them, and they're more persuasive or deceptive, more useful in social situations, and you would imagine social situations with Fae. One thing I would say is that the part where you have advantage on charms. Yeah, it's not good. If you have Fey ancestry, I think that should combine to be immunity to being frightened, because if you're yourself from Fey magic, with I guess Fey magic by itself, then I think you should also, if you have the Fey magic within you, you should be able to augment that, not merely duplicate it, or redundancy it. So that's one thing I would change. Now let's move on to Dreadful Strikes, and this is where we get the tools for more aggressive negotiations. You summon a bit of fright from the Unsealing Court, some of the haunting magic of their presence, and you smack people with it when you hit them with attacks. It's not very exciting, certainly flavorful to be sure, but not very interesting. But it ties into the next ability, which is Blessings of the Courts, where you take that smack and you summon even more fright by expending a spell slot. It's similar to Divine Smite, which I think it's actually really interesting that the same idea is with the Fae as it is with the gods. Like, higher powers give you that ability. Consistency. Anyways, you can summon even more of the gloom and haunt and despair that is the Unseelie Court, and you can use that against your enemies. This is, I think, one of the core ideas of this Fey Wanderer, is they're using Fey magic for their own purposes. They're taking the presence of the Unseelie Court, and they're using it to augment their fighting ability. Another thing this thing gives you, this feature, is it gives you add your wisdom modifier to charisma checks. And so it comes with the subtle implication that your words are now laced with magic, as a Fey would have, and it's just more of this is not just a fighter, just a smacker about her, like the paladin sometimes is. This is somebody who has the tools for both situations, who's comfortable in both. And this is, I think, one of the great things about this Fey Wanderer. It's not just a smacker upper, it's a smacker upper and a sweet talker upper. Now, Beguiling Twist is sort of you're taking Fey magic and twisting it around and into different ways. Maybe somebody attacks you with a charm or attacks your ally, and you use that to twist it around and try to charm them, or, just deal psychic damage. I think this time psychic damage is not good because it's general Fey magic, so maybe it's another type. I don't know. But you're twisting around magic. The times it's Fey magic, you're twisting it around, or you're also using it for your allies. If your allies fail, you can twist their magic and try to get them to affect another person, which I think is really good teamwork. It's a thing where you can help yourself, help your friends, and debuff your enemies. It's great. And then Misty Presence is kind of invisibility, but only on one person. I think it's not that good in combat. It's good for haunting them or sneaking around them or negotiating, but with the upper hand. Like, I could attack you at any time and you can't stop me, kind of thing. So the Misty Presence, it does have some social uses and roleplay uses. It also has combat uses, but less so. We're going to talk about those in the mechanical review. But before that, I just want to, kind of recap and show you the difference between the Horizon Walker and the Fey Wanderer. The Fey Wanderer is more social, because if you're dealing with Fey, social encounters is also a viable option for dealing with Fey, and also just interacting with Fey in general. The Fey are not entirely evil, so you're not entirely fighting them. You may also be persuading them, deceiving them, and really interesting and unique things you can do with the Fey. So I like this. It's different from the Horizon Walker. You can be Horizon Walker-like, but you can also be something more. You can walk a line. And that, I think, is the true genius of the Fey Wanderer. So speaking of genius, things that require smartness in order to do good, like, for instance, game design. Let's talk about the mechanics of the Fey Wanderer. That was a horrible transition. So for Dreadful Strikes, I have two things I want to comment on. The first is that this is part of the new design of the Ranger, where you get a combat buff at 3rd level and a combat buff at 11th level. This was there in the Hunter, whereas or at least it was an offense damage output buff at 3rd and 11th level for the Hunter, at least. I'm not sure about the Beastmaster. And some people saying, it's them trying to fix the Ranger without actually fixing the base class of the Ranger. And if they want to do that, if they want to just keep the PHB Ranger, because trying to make a revised Ranger would cause problems with all these things like that. But anyways, I'm fine with this design. It allows you to have options at 7th level to do non-combat things. Okay, this is a bad example, but the 3rd and 11th level is kind of good, because if you have unique styles of boosts, like for instance the Horizon Walker, they use their bonus action to convert to force damage. They're good at bypassing resistances and fighting many enemies, which is good for fighting against hordes of invaders. Gloomstalker is good at not missing and ambushing and doing a lot of damage in the first round of combat, which just makes sense. It's a stalker. It's an ambusher. So they ambush and they're good at it. So I like the Xanathar subclasses where it's their style lends itself from the mechanics. But this, yeah, I see the criticism. It's just a D6. You do a bonus action, you get a D6 of damage. Now there are two interesting things about this. Kind of three, so 2.5. That this is the second part of what I was going to say. Anyways, one, it's magical now, as opposed to just being have some more damage. It's psychic damage, which is less resisted. But the third thing that's interesting, or at least the second and a half thing that's interesting, is the fact that that one creature can be affected by it once per turn. But it doesn't say that you can't apply this multiple times per turn. So you can hit multiple enemies. You can hit 2 Fey, or 3 Fey if you're using 2-weapon fighting, and they all get the damage on them. That's the way you do it. You're good at fighting hordes, and it kind of makes sense. If you have if we don't have that many Fey in D&D, and so the Fey that we have are sort of low level compared to higher level stuff, so this becomes more useful when you start having to fight a lot of like dryads and things in order to actually fight Fey in higher levels. So it does become useful then. It also becomes useful for just fighting hordes generally. And the blessing of the courts thing, it is very slightly better in terms of averages than Smite of first level. It does 3d6 has a 10.5 average damage, whereas the 2d8 of a Smite does 10 damage flat on average. So you're slightly better if you use a first level spell slot, but then again, you don't have Smite, so you're not comparing it like that. I just feel like this is also boring. Like, I get the flavor's interesting, but it's boring to just have, let's give you Divine Smite. Yeah, mechanically it's boring because somebody else already has it, and they have a better version of it, like Beguiling Twist. Because this is actually really interesting. You're twisting around magic, alright? I don't, like, we've had Counterspell and such, but there's being able to twist around magic is something interesting that we haven't seen. And in a beguilingly clever twist, this actually synergizes with your 7th level ability. So one thing I didn't mention about the Blessings of the Court, the Smite ability, is that it also puts a save on the enemy against being frightened. So, Beguiling Twist, which procs when a nearby creature succeeds on a save versus being charmed or frightened, you can then twist the magic and redirect and attack somebody else with the same charm or frightened, or with some psychic damage. I think in terms of damage, 3d10 psychic damage, it's a decent chunk. It's like a 2nd level spell or something. And then a charmed and frightened, it's also 1st and 2nd level spells. So this is really not that big of a. It's not overpowered, but I think it's just fun to just twist around spells. Your enemy's spells, your friend's spells, your own spells, because you got a charmed person. So it's just really useful for you. Now, Misty Presence is kind of like invisibility, but against one person for 24 hours. And I don't really see the mechanical benefit of 24 hours increase for only against one person. Like I said before, Haunting is good. It's decent as a roleplay, as a social use or also an exploration. You're just, following them. It does have a slightly better combat application where they have to succeed on a saving throw. Yeah, it's a wisdom saving throw. They have to succeed on a whiz save against you when you make an attack. Not just they can see you now. So it's a bit better than regular invisibility. It's very Fey in its nature, just removing yourself from one person's eyes, but I don't see a 5th level person. I feel like there should be something more. I can't say what should be there for the Fey Wanderer, but I feel like there needs to be more for this guy. So mechanically, it's not that good. It feels kind of boring at some parts. I love the Beguiling Twist feature. Misty Presence, I can see the use of it. I'm not sure it's like a 15th level ability, but it's useful. And then Dreadful Strikes needs to be different. It needs to fit in line with the Fey magic idea. I like the idea of, like, you're doing a special attack and it charms or frightens people, but I think maybe you should have, like, either an ability that causes charms or frightens, or maybe you have, like, spend a spell slot to try to frighten somebody, and then later you have an ability that increases your effectiveness against charmed or frightened creatures, or, helps people who are charmed and frightened. Those are the tools of the Fae, so you would use the tools, you would fight against the tools. That makes sense as the Fae. I just feel like just doing psychic damage, and then having a smite which does more psychic damage and also frightens people, which is better. But again, Dreadful Strikes, I have to say it's pretty dreadful. So yeah, the Fey Wanderer is different from the Horizon Walker. It's not the damage-dealing beast that is the Horizon Walker. It is instead a more subtle approach with different tools for different scenarios, which I do like about the Fey Wanderer, and I really feel the subclass needs to be worked on to be improved. So that's all for the Fey Wanderer, but if you want to see how I'm making the base class Ranger more effective, then click that playlist right there where I'm talking about the Ranger and what I'm doing to improve it.